A calmer, gentler winter is on the way. Joining us for more on that prediction and other nuggets of information that you can find in the 2025 Old Farmer's Almanac is Associate Editor Joseph Bills. Joe, zooming in on Nebraska and Kansas, what are the winter months of November, December, and January expected to be like?
It's not going to deviate a whole lot from what you've come to expect, but it looks right now like, according to our models, you can expect sort of the winter to tend more towards the mild and dry. The big exception there would be sort of the western quarter of Nebraska, where it's going to be colder than average out as you get towards that Wyoming-Colorado border. That skews things a bit. But the majority of the state, you're looking at milder, drier weather. In the early winter, November temperatures are going to just be like a couple degrees above normal, a couple degrees below normal in that farther western portion of the state, I should say. Western portions of the state will flirt with snow as early as the first weeks of November, but it looks like most of the region's going to be warm enough to see rain. Temperatures will remain well above average into December and then kind of normalize a bit as we head into January.
And during the winter months, Joe, are there any certain times Nebraska and Kansas need to watch for extreme cold and some winter storms?
Of course there are. So it looks, right now, according to our models, it looks like there's some heavy rain in mid-November and into those middle weeks of December. But, of course, as everybody knows, just a couple degrees of deviation in the temperature models can turn that rain-snow line. So there's, I would say, a slight chance in that window. There'll definitely be some light snow, at least in early January, particularly in the western regions. But for most of the area, I'd say the first real wallop of the season, moving into the last week of January, should bring a pretty good storm. And January will likely bring the first really extended stretch of below-average temperatures, too.
When the Old Farmer's Almanac prepared its forecast for the next year, Joe, what were some of the driving factors this time around, and also how accurate has the forecast been over the years?
We're actually coming off a bit of a lesser year as far as our prediction averages go. We were off a bit on some of the temperatures last year. That dropped our predictions overall down into like the mid to upper 60s percentage-wise. But we usually, over the years, we pride ourselves on hanging right around 80-degree accuracy on our predictions. And we usually hit something pretty close to that mark. We actually still use a modified version of the same system that our founder, Robert B. Thomas, initiated way back in 1792 when he started this publication. We're the oldest ongoing periodical in North America, keeping it alive. He believed back then that magnetic storms on the surface of the sun were one of the driving factors of weather on Earth. We still look at that. We still incorporate solar science into our long-range predictions. We, of course, have modernized a bit over the years. So we talk to climatologists looking at weather patterns over time and meteorologists looking at the atmosphere in general and what's going on in the atmosphere. At this point, we've been doing this stuff long enough that there's usually some commonality in the patterns that we see that we can compare to what we've seen before, and that kind of lays the groundwork and the pattern for our predictions coming up. We use a 30-year sort of baseline set of averages to call things into focus for us as we look at things.
Talking right now with Associate Editor Joseph Bills for more on what you can find in the now available 2025 Old Farmer's Almanac. Joe, the Old Farmer's Almanac also offers a prediction for what next summer is going to be like. How is it looking here in Nebraska and Kansas?
It's probably not exactly what farmers want to hear, I'm sorry to say. It's looking like it's shaping up to be a hot and dry summer. Temperatures bumping well above average as sort of June gives way to July and August. The rainfall will be a bit below average for those summer months, but it's going to feel, I think, even a little bit more so because it's looking like the spring is going to be pretty dry, too. The groundwater won't be in place, so the summer's going to seem even a little drier than it really is.
Joe, can Nebraska and Kansas expect any real stormy periods and extreme heat next summer?
Well, I guess maybe there's a little bit of good news on that front. There are indicators for thunderstorms throughout the summer months. I think that's pretty much always the case for you guys. There's no clear window that really shows anything coming together in a way that looks like it's going to be particularly severe. That, of course, doesn't mean those elements may not come together. They probably will at least once or twice, but not in a way that we can predict from here. We're looking at a summer that looks like it's going to be pretty hot throughout the whole thing. The heat will definitely be at its worst come late June, early July, and then again it'll really kick in around mid-July and carry through mid-August. Temperatures, pretty significantly above normal in those windows.
The Old Farmer's Almanac, well known for its farming and gardening information, including with using the different moon cycles. Joe, talk about how we could take advantage of those moon cycles in that article, Tune into the Moon.
That's one of my favorite articles in this new edition, so I'm glad you brought it up. In that article, I think everybody at this point is pretty well acquainted with the idea that the moon affects the tides. The gravity and the pull of the moon is one of the driving forces of the tides that we see in the ocean. What I think a lot of people are less familiar with is the idea that those same forces affect groundwater. They also, coincidentally, affect a lot of plants. A plant could be as much as 80 or 90% water, and a lot of people even feel like they affect us because we're about 60% water. When it comes to planting, as we sort of move into a new moon cycle with less pull on the groundwater recedes a little bit from the surface. I would say going into this, I wouldn't advise anybody to make drastic changes to their planting cycle based on moon cycles. If you can conveniently align your already established planting cycle with these sort of tips, it might give you a few percentage points of benefit along the way. So the new moon cycle, less moisture in the soil, it's a good time to turn your soil and to plant things like lettuce and spinach or grains, herbs, basically any plants that produce seed outside their fruit. As we get to like the quarter moon, the water's starting to rise in the soil. That's your time to plant things like beans and peas, squash, melons, tomatoes, things like that. The full moon is the part in the cycle where the root growth is maximized. So root crops like carrots and onions and potatoes, best time to plant them right then. Final quarter of the cycle is your time to kick back and relax a little bit, maybe do some weeding, and wait for it all to begin again. The moon cycles monthly. Again, wouldn't advise anybody to drastically change their schedules based on those, but to the degree that you can kind of tweak your schedule to align, you might find a little bit of benefit there.
And once again, all that information is in the article Tune into the Moon in the 2025 version of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Joe, just how much is the 2025 edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac, and how can we get a copy?
The classic almanac that most people think of, the little yellow book with the hole punched in the upper left-hand corner, is $8.99, still available. We also have a couple sort of upgraded versions that are a little bit more expensive. Sometimes those are the versions that you'll find available in bookstores. Those in the paperback edition, those go for $10.95. We are in as many places as we can be, of course. So you'll find us at supply stores in your neck of the woods. That'd be places like Baumgar's and Hy-Vee and Northwest Feed and Grain. We're in bookshops, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, as many national chains as feel appropriate. Places like Ace Hardware and Bass Pro Shops, Kroger's, Lowe's, Walgreens, Walmart. And if none of those work, of course, many of the websites of those national chains carry us, and there's always Amazon. They carry everything.
Thank you very much for joining us, Joe. That's Associate Editor Joseph Bills previewing the key information that you can find in the 2025 Old Farmer's Almanac that is available now. You can also check their website, almanac.com. That's almanac.com. And make sure you like the Facebook page for the Old Farmer's Almanac for unique information all throughout the year. I'm Paul Perkins on the Rural Radio Network.